Hi, my name's Meg. I'm a 3D artist and compositor, and I found this art challenge through Crimson Hollow. Crimson Hollow is a game that's being designed by a game developer called Courtney. I've been watching her game dev vlogs for a while, and I recently discovered her Discord channel, which is where she's hosting this Trickster art challenge. I only started learning Blender a few months ago. Before that, I worked in Maya. I do think if you're already competent in a piece of 3D software, it's not as difficult to learn a new piece of 3D software. So I challenged myself to learn the basics of Blender in 30 days, but unfortunately, due to other work commitments, I had to stop after 15 days. I was actually going to post that on YouTube, but because I was unable to finish it, I never uploaded it. And I thought I would just throw it in here because it seemed like a shame to put all that work in and never publish it anywhere. I did also use my Saturn shot to do a nuke tutorial as well, just to try and get as much out of it as I could. I've also done a little bit of modelling since I finished my last freelance job. I took part in another challenge hosted by Blender Vitals, which was where I modelled a skyship and like a skyship dock scene. And now I'm giving myself a new challenge of attempting to model a 3D character. I have also created a time-lapse video of this so you can see the full process with no voiceover and linked it up here. One of my favourite YouTubers at the moment is TinyNoki, and I absolutely love his character designs. They're so cute, and super conveniently he actually has a video on how to create your own 3D cute character. So I watched that, and then I watched basically all his other videos, downloaded his Tiny Eye add-on, and then I jumped into doing some research and trying to find some reference for what a Trickster looks like. So this is the Pinterest board I put together. I found that the kind of common elements were a mask and a kind of clown / circus performer kind of aesthetic. I wanted my design to look a bit more like cutesy though, and I was definitely going for something in the kind of style of TinyNoki. And yeah, that was about it. Then I jumped into blocking because I hadn't really planned out at all what I was going to make. I sort of maybe had a few ideas in my head, like some elements I would like in it, but I just kind of felt it out as I went. I think if I did it again, I might approach it more like how I've seen other 3D artists do it and actually sketch something first. But who knows, maybe I'll just keep jumping right in and figuring out as I go. And it was really hard to actually trust the process on this. I was quite concerned that it was going to look really bad, especially at the beginning, and I'm not saying it turned out great, but I was worried it was going to look a lot worse. I really wanted like a layered aesthetic. There was a few kind of more cutesy imagery in my reference, which is definitely more what I was leaning towards, but I was still trying to bring in more of those sort of like Trickster elements. So it ended up being kind of a balance between the Trickster elements and the more kind of layered, cutesy kind of cone shaped clothing that I really liked. I modelled the clothing this way rather than using a cloth sim or something similar, partly because I don't really know like the cloth simulation in Blender super well yet. I've used it once before and I can see it's useful, but I also thought because it's not going to be animated and the style was meant to be quite chunky anyway for the clothes, that it didn't seem worth learning or putting the effort into like making a cloth simulation for this particular build. But down the line, I think maybe if I'm making more realistic kind of characters or less cutesy characters where there's more detailing in the clothing, I might consider using a mix or cloth simulations to try and get those folds more. I found modelling the clothing like interesting. I'm not sure if I enjoyed it or not. I quite liked it when I got to more the detailed part of it. Then you could kind of see it coming together, but I think most of the time when I was modelling the clothing for this, I was worried it was going to look awful and second guessing whether or not I should have done cloth simulations for it. After I got kind of the initial shapes down and spending, I don't know why I spent quite a bit of time on the shoes, and then I started sort of trying to get the positioning and stuff of the body right. I really wasn't sure when to pose a character. I was sort of debating whether or not I should try and rig the character as well, but just the idea of weight painting everything just seemed like it was quite a big extra step for something I have no intention of ever animating, so I decided just to sort of try and do it early on before there was like too many details or geometry to get bogged down in. And I've kind of seen other artists do something similar, so I thought, yeah, this would be a good time to do it. Regrettably, I should have sorted out the face topology and probably, done all that before I repositioned the face. I did mention at the beginning of this video that I downloaded Tiny Eye, which is a free add-on for Blender made by Tiny Noki, and it's basically a library of procedural eyes in a whole bunch of different styles. I just went for the basic eye on this build and changed the size of the iris and pupil to try and get that kind of cute aesthetic. Once the eyes had been added in, I could see a lot more of the issues, but also my first sculpt of the head. I just did it really quickly because I was still in kind of the blocking phase and I didn't want to get really caught up in detailing, but probably gone far enough through that I could start just getting lost in the details a bit. I think once I put the eyes in, it very quickly started to look a lot more how I wanted it to look and a lot more in that kind of cute aesthetic I was going for. I really like the Blender sculpting tools. Maya doesn't really have anything like it. I mean, they're in there, but they don't really work very well at all. So previously I did all my sculpting in ZBrush. I was sort of trying to recreate this jester hat with the hair and the kind of style hat I had gone for. So using kind of 2 braids and then the top of the hat for like the fur part of the jester. I started cleaning up the hands, merging the meshes together and sculpting into them. I modelled like this because it seemed like the most efficient and easy way to do it. Making a hand from a sphere and 4 sausages seemed a lot easier than trying to sculpt it any other way I could think of at the time. I added smaller details like the teeth and the tongue. After I added these details, it helped with the face structure and the mouth shape, and I kind of realized the mouth was way too small on the inside, so I sort of expanded that. Then I just finished cleaning up the areas I knew we would see, like the left hand that's holding the staff. I didn't bother spending much time on the arms as I knew these would be covered with the sleeves. I used a cube to model the sleeves as I wanted this to be quite a chunky rectangle shape that would fit around the overcoat of the character. I then duplicated and molded the sleeve to match the shape of the other arm. I kept the geometry very simple so it was easier to control. I then moved on to the overcoat. I'm revealing the layers of clothing underneath, so you can see all the layering, but also just because of the style and the aesthetic I wanted. I wanted this kind of witchy, trickstery kind of vibe of just like layers and layers of clothing. But also just to add more interest and intrigue, obviously, like the more detail and stuff you put into a model, it kind of helps really sell it and bring it to life, and those details do really help fill out the scene. To be honest, I didn't really put as many layers of clothing in that I kind of wanted. It was already ended up taking a long time to model this, so I sort of reined it in a bit on my original kind of ideas for the clothing. I could kind of see the model and clothing coming together now, and I started to enjoy the clothing process slightly more. It was also at this point I noticed my character looked a bit like one of those old-fashioned witch hunters, which wasn't the direction this was supposed to go in. But, I figured in for a penny, in for a pound, and I didn't want to spend any more time on this build, so I figured I would just see it through and hope by the time the clothing was textured and all the additional magical props were finished, she would look less like she wanted to burn innocent people on stakes, or whatever it is those old-timey hooligans used to do. I also hoped that if I added a scarf that might cover the collar, that wasn't doing her any favours. I spent a little while just trying to get the scarf to flow in a pleasing way. I made this just by extruding a plane with a solidify modifier. I was at the stage now where I was just refining details, adding edge loops to define the sleeves, and adding a few extra details. I'd put off the mask for ages and quickly modelled a pair of eye holes and sculpted a nose, cheeks and smile in. I also added some details to the staff to make it look more magical. I had a lot of fun with the hair. It was initially quite frustrating, but once I got my head around it, I love the grooming process. The particle edit is a really fun tool. It was like being a hairdresser but with the power to grow and change the colour of hair at will. My dream career when I was 6 was actually to be a hairdresser. I also wanted to have 11 children and no husband. When my parents asked me how I intended to work and raise 11 kids with no partner, I told my parents that they would take care of them whilst I was at work. As you can imagine, they were thrilled about this idea. Anyway, no kids and a career in VFX later, I'm glad I could digitally live out this part of my childhood fantasy. I ended up not really using my proxy geometry of the hair, but I still tried to create these 2 separate strands of hair, but it ended up looking more like a wild mane rather than 2 braids. So I had to clean up the face topology if I wanted it to work at all. I didn't do it earlier because I wasn't sure that I had to. I thought maybe I could get away with not doing it, and obviously it's work. I really sped it up in this video just to get through it, but it took quite a while to do that. And I know that there's some add-ons and stuff you can get that clean up topology really fast, but the ones I know of cost a bit of money, and I didn't want to purchase that at the moment. After I cleaned up the face topology, I was able to use the texture painting in Blender to create custom textures for the face. I did this for the face and not the rest of the models, once again, it was just a time thing and also just unnecessary. I thought for the rest of the textures I could probably get it done just using different shading techniques and stuff. But on the face I wanted to have a bit more control over where the details and things were. So like kind of shading the eye sockets and the mouth, and then bringing out the cheeks slightly and putting a few highlights in. It took me a while to paint the face in Blender. I haven't really done it much before. I thought about maybe doing it in Photoshop, but I like being able to see right away how it's being affected by what I'm painting, so I decided just to keep it all in Blender for this. If I was doing something more complicated, I'd probably take it into Substance or take it into Photoshop. I only UV mapped certain elements of my model, so the undergarment and the scarf. I just UV mapped these ones because I needed to. I created the mask with this kind of transparent and caustic effects because honestly I didn't really know what else to do with it. I tried quite a lot of other things on it. I tried painting it as well, like I painted the face. It didn't gel very well with the rest of the model, and in the end I sort of decided to go with this kind of transparent, caustic, magical kind of look. Once I'd done that, I used the light to cast those caustics onto the face and the body of the model. Finally, I jumped into Photoshop to do some quick fixes. I didn't do much in Photoshop, I just added a bit more of a glow effect onto the staff and cleaned up some of the hair issues that I'd noticed in the render. It's really cool that Blender has a compositing element to it, but with a background in compositing in Nuke and other software, I prefer to take it out and put into other software that I feel more comfortable compositing in. And yeah, that's really it. She ended up looking a bit creepy and stuff, but I don't hate it. I quite like how she ended up looking, and I'm happy with it for a first try. Thanks for watching.